Today, we're going to talk about one of the most popular subjects in psychedelic wellness and what I believe is one of the most misunderstood: integration. If you're new to the show, I'm Eric Osborne. If you're coming back, well, thank you very much. Today, I'm going to talk about a topic that is likely to ruffle some feathers, not because of my opinion, though, but because of the scientific evidence that we have around the ineffectiveness of, dare I say, therapy itself, but particularly in this context, psychedelic integration. Now, got to make a disqualifier before we go further. I'm not against therapy. I am in an incredible group relationship marriage therapy program, not because my marriage is on the rocks, but because I really believe that having educated, experienced individuals to speak about the challenging aspects of our lives and who can provide some insight is a legitimately valuable tool to become the next highest version of yourself. But what I really want to focus on is what we haven't focused on as a society, and that is the limitations of therapy, but again, particularly in the context of psychedelic integration. Now, psychedelic integration is it's a hot buzzword right now. Ever since psychedelics have come back in vogue, integration is, well, it's kind of the thing, right? People say that the integration is more important than the experience itself, and I believe there is some truth in that, but I'm also very aware that you can have a powerful psychedelic experience that you will not be able to remember large portions of, and specifically those portions that you can't recall can have real and lasting value. I'll share one example with you that proved that to me. A Marine veteran that I worked with many years ago, he was actually from Australia. He came because he voluntarily left the military because he felt ideologically opposed to what was happening there. And when he resigned, apparently some of his former colleagues found him out at a bar and attacked him viciously, actually. Now, again, like, none of this is to be taken as a overgeneralization of any demographic. Veterans are some of the most amazing human beings I've ever worked with. This is not knocking veterans or even the military. It's speaking to the power of an experience that can't be recalled. And this individual came with PTSD that was unimaginable. He had a bottle busted over his head, and they tried to gouge his eyes out. It was a horrible, horrible thing that was done to him. And he was, of course, highly traumatized afterwards. It was some of the worst PTSD that I'd ever seen, quite honestly. Doors shutting would cause him to lock up, and just the slightest noise. And this individual had 2 doses with me and then a third. His first 2 doses were moderate, 3 and 5 grams. Nothing enormous happened in those experiences. And perhaps there was a bit of a graduated internal process that went on that led to the profound shift that he experienced on the third dose. But the third dose, that I'm really speaking of, was 8 grams. He took the mushrooms, lay down in a bed, and was out for a solid 6 hours. I mean, just completely, you would have thought the guy was fast asleep. And 6 hours later, he just kind of came to. He didn't remember anything from that experience. Nothing. There were no visuals. It was just blackness and a loss of consciousness, basically, while he lay on the bed, kind of moaning and writhing. He never had a single episode of PTSD afterwards. Now, I only kept track of him for about 3 years, so I can't say how he's doing today. That was probably about 7 or 8 years ago. But it was phenomenal to see the improvement that he experienced just after those 3 sessions, but primarily after that 8-gram dose, where he didn't have an experience, arguably. There was nothing there. So How do you integrate those kinds of experiences is one of the questions that I'd love to just kind of sit with here. But moreover, just to recognize that just because you don't remember an experience doesn't mean that it doesn't integrate into your being. So that's where I want to start is our common, I believe, misconception around what integration is. There are any number of psychedelic integration experts out there. I know many. I'm friends with many. I'm not knocking them. I consider myself one, though I don't tend to advertise myself in that way. And I have witnessed a large and growing number of individuals who have very little experience with psychedelics who label themselves as an integration expert. I think there's a number of reasons why that might be the case. Currently, there's no certification. Most of the therapists who are even interested in psychedelics have very little experience with these compounds, and that's certainly a limiting factor. Uh, so many people that I've worked with have tried to have these quote integration conversations with a therapist who was not familiar with psychedelics and felt like they just could not serve the individuals properly. And I agree, they couldn't. Um, but what's most important here that I want to really highlight is that integration is not just a conversation. Integration is not just recalling your experiences, going back through visions and uh, metaphors or interpretations. That is an important and really valuable part of psychedelic integration. And this is one of the reasons why I believe a very experienced psychedelic voyager who is also conscientious and in an active practice themselves are the best folks to help you walk through those conversations. And I've had thousands at this point. I actually had one yesterday, someone who heard me on a recent podcast, the Kyle Kingsbury podcast. Shout out to Kyle. If you're not familiar with his show, you can go listen there. I shared some very different stories than I have previously. But a listener to that show reached out to me on TikTok and let me know that he had a really challenging mushroom experience, um, hours of purging. He'd never had anything like that despite many, many years of experience. And so it felt like this person could use a talk, a conversation. And so I asked them to share their number and we got into the phone and had about a half an hour conversation. And through that conversation, based on some of the personally traumatic experiences that I've had in my mushroom work, I've shared somewhat about the experience where I literally sweated blood. I know that sounds completely off the rails. It was one of the most terrifying and one of the most positively impactful experiences of my life. But because I had that experience and I was able to connect with this individual in a way that I'm not sure there's anybody else that could ever. If there are, there's few and far between. And in that conversation, some of the questions that I asked, he expressed real gratitude because they allowed him to revisit some of the nuanced material, some of the inferred material that came up through his experience that kind of connected back to relationships and other aspects of his life that he hadn't really thought about. And so it's so valuable to have someone who is knowledgeable, skilled, and compassionate, not judgmental, who can help you have these conversations and unpack them a little bit more. But that is just the tip of the iceberg. Now, there's an uncomfortable statistic that I'm going to share with you right now. This is also related in my book that is about to publish November 2nd. If you're interested, that is going to be titled, or it is already titled, The Psychedelic Reformation, Why Psilocybin Belongs in a Church and Not a Clinic. I'm not saying it doesn't belong in a clinic at all. I'm not saying there's no place for it, but the proper home, I truly believe, for these experiences, particularly with the mushroom, my book goes into detail as to why this is the case, is actually a faith-based community. We'll get into that a little bit down the road here in this conversation because it is relevant to the integration topic. But right now I want to touch on a couple of stats here that I have, and sorry I don't have them memorized, but I do have them close at hand. This is a study that was done in the late 90s by Michael Lambert. I'm sorry, the early 90s, 92. And he was a psychotherapist who did some research to try and determine what is exactly responsible for the outcomes of a therapy session. And the results are probably going to surprise you. All right, so this is a pretty shocking discovery, and it really shakes the foundation of what we think we know about therapy. So 40% of the outcomes of therapy are actually attributed to extra therapeutic factors, okay? And those are things like characteristics of the client, their strength and motivation, their openness and persistence, things like their lifestyle or environmental influences. These are all things that a therapist, or even the practices that a therapist presents you with, have no influence over. Things like fortuitous or unfortuitous events, spontaneous improvement. What's that, right? Just out of nowhere you get better, which does happen. Similar to my friend I spoke of with the PTSD. The 30% of the positive outcomes are attributed to what are known as common factors or relationship factors. Okay. And these are elements that are shared across therapies, and they come down to characteristics like empathy, warmth, collaboration, and positive regard. So, really, what this is talking about is the relationship that the individual has with their therapist. So, if you have a empathic, compassionate relationship with your therapist, then you are much more likely to have positive outcomes. Then we've got 15% that is attributed to expectancy, placebo, and hope. Okay, so 15% of your therapeutic outcomes are related to your optimism, how positive you feel about yourself and being in therapy. Only 15%, this is the shocking part, only 15% of the benefit of therapy is related to specific techniques. Okay? 15% of the positive outcomes of therapy are related to the actual techniques shared with you by the therapist. 40% are due to factors in your life that maybe no one can control. 30% is due to the relationship that you have with your therapist. 15% is due to the placebo effect or your hopefulness that you're going to get better. Only 15% of the overall impact of therapy is actually related to any kind of therapeutic process, the techniques and practices that come out of a therapist training. Now, again, I'm not anti-therapy. I suspect we have overvalued this profession to an extent, and I mean that particularly when it comes to psychedelic therapy, to psychedelic integration. Now, why is that the case? All right, so if 40%, we've already got these figures, 40% outside, 30% relationships, 15% placebo, 15% therapeutic applications, right? Now, you think about yourself as a psychedelic explorer. You've had a major experience that has left you knowing that you deserve better, knowing that you can be better. And you go into your therapist and talk about this experience. You're paying lots of money to go into a psychedelic therapist to talk about your experience. And that is maybe 5% of any kind of positive outcome that you're going to receive. If there's 10% left over for techniques, so be it. But where do you go for the rest? How do you navigate the rest? And what does the rest of it even look like? Okay, this is why I formed a community, a spiritually based community. And I'm not trying to have this podcast to sell you on my community. I'm trying to share this information because I want you to seek out the community that is right for you. Integration is actually integrating these experiences into your life. And you do not do that by going to a therapist's office once a month, not even once a week. You integrate these experiences into your life, the lessons that you've learned, the outcomes that you desire in community. Why? Because community is our life. We are tribal creatures. We are seeking belonging. We are meaning making, and we always do that in the context of our relationships. Our culture has continued to overvalue individualism in the same way that I believe that we overvalue therapy. My hope and my confidence is that we are beginning to see through the false sense of security that we gain through social media, through the false sense of security that we gain by giving governments and even institutional religion authority over our lives, by the false sense of security that we have assumed when we isolate, that somehow we're protecting ourselves, that somehow we're becoming better by not being involved with the world around us. All this is coming crashing down upon us. We are seeing absolutely the effects of loneliness, the impact of COVID and the isolation that happened there. We're still reeling from all that, and we're still only just now beginning to realize how crucial it is that we are in community. Something like, there's some statistic I just recently heard where it's like people now see their best friend on average once a month in person. This is a real problem, my friends. If you have little kids, you understand, coming out of summer right now, how incredibly valuable it is for children to have other children around. You see how different they are when they come back from being in an all-day environment where they are surrounded by peers. We are not meant to live in isolation. We die in isolation. And so this, I believe with all of my being, is the truth of what psychedelic integration is. It is integrating yourself and your experiences and the lessons that you've learned into active community. And just like going to a therapist who does not understand psychedelics is ineffective for your, as we currently understand, psychedelic integration, participating in a community that does not understand psychedelics is not going to benefit your integration either. Now, in our community, we have a wide range of individuals, and a large number of them are 12 members of 12-step programs. One of the most challenging reports that I hear from those demographics is how much pain they feel, and the fact that they cannot share their psychedelic growth with people who are in the 12-step program. If you're not familiar with AA and the like, which are incredible programs, far more positive outcomes than, quote, talk therapy, because it's community based and because it's spiritually based. But overall, extremely opposed to altered states. I get it. Alcoholism is a very, very challenging condition to deal with. I personally have a different perspective on addiction. I don't believe it is a disease of genetics or personality. I believe it's a symptom of a social disease, but we'll leave that, stick a pin in that for now. But what I see is individuals who really feel the struggle of not being able to share their psychedelic work with their 12-step communities. And part of the reason that they feel that is because they not only do they want to just share themselves with their people, but they want to help the people that they're around. And this is the core component of community. Not that we become do-gooders and we want to save the people around us, but it is it is in our human family, it is in our relationships that we find healing because we love each other. Think about the people in your life that you probably don't see enough. You love them, you want the best for them. One of the most profound realizations that folks come away with from their psychedelic experiences with is the reality that you can't save anybody else, that you can only improve your own life, and through that you can actively help improve the lives of the people around you. It's a bit of a paradox that by helping ourselves is how we actually help others. But if you do that in isolation, well, you're not really helping anybody. And if you're working on your self improvement, your spiritual, personal growth in isolation, then you are likely not growing as fast as you could be, as becoming as integrated as a person as you truly desire to be. And why is that? Well, it's because we need to make mistakes. We need to screw up in front of our community. We need to have our shadow reflected back to us, if that's through the shadow of someone else or if it's through the recognition of our own shadow and seeing how it covers up others, then that is incredibly powerful. And in our miseducation around community, it is probably the single greatest holdback that I see from individuals' personal growth and community. Because here is what happens. Oh, I've seen this so many times. I've done it. And there's a certain part of me that feels if I was not a community leader, I'm not sure I wouldn't fall into the same trap on repeat as well. And that is when someone makes a mistake in the front of everybody. I had this wonderful, wonderful man, someone who I thought I still hold him as a friend. But this was an individual who, really talked the talk about psychedelic integration in community, showed up in community, and then he fell back into an old pattern. He started just like kind of, he just kind of trash talked some people in a meeting. There's like a group of people and said some stuff that shouldn't have been said. And several people were like, hey, bud, that's not okay. And instead of acknowledging it, instead of repairing, he just said, you know what, screw you all. I can't even be me around you. And then took off, left the community. This is an outcome of our conditioning as a society. We have created disposable everything. Even these psychedelic experiences, you go to an ayahuasca or a psilocybin retreat for a week, you have this huge experience, and then, okay, well, I'm going to go back to my cubicle and forget that ever happened, or, talk about how great it was and then not actually show up and do the work. But, the reality is most of us don't know what it means to show up and do the work because we have been taught that isolationism is where it's at. Now, I also see incredible growth happen in community from a virtual sense. Now, this is a reality of us as a people right now. And I personally think it's going to be a part of our lives forever as long as technology continues to exist. And I'm actually really grateful for it because I've met many amazing people through a virtual community that I would have never met. Some of them I have and will meet in person, and some of them I never will. And that's okay. But I still show up and see these folks, and we still are in relationship, and they hear me say the things that I want to improve on, and then they ask me about it. Some of them, thank goodness, are brave enough to point out when I'm not doing what I said I wanted to do. Because guess what? An enormous and important, extremely valuable part of psychedelic integration, believe it or not, is backsliding. I'll never forget one of the first times this really stood out to me working with an individual who was a recovering alcoholic. He had been off alcohol for maybe a year or so and came to a retreat with us, had an incredible mushroom experience. Afterwards, there were some folks that were smoking cannabis. In the days between, sometimes people would have a beer with their dinner, and he ended up having a drink. And while he was on the retreat, he did fine. But when he went home, fell off the wagon, so to speak, and had a significant relapse. But that relapse is exactly what taught him that not to drink. It's the thing that drove home the reality that he didn't want to consume alcohol. And the same has been the case with me. I've been very honest about my struggles with cannabis. I've kind of been having a little bit of a back and forth with it here lately. And even me sharing this publicly is part of being in relationship with my community. Maybe we will never meet. Maybe we'll never even have a conversation. But if you're listening to this content and you regularly listen to my content, then we're in a relationship. And I appreciate whatever that dynamic is, because it's helping to keep me honest. It's helping to keep me conscious. It's helping me to integrate the lessons that I know I want to embody. Integration is the embodiment of the lessons, of the experiences, of the realizations that we have through our psychedelic work, in particular in this case. And so I cannot overstate how incredibly valuable community is to integration. And I want to encourage you to find a community, in person, virtual, whatever the case is. Start where you can and ease yourself into it if you need to. It will yield so much value in your life. You know, one of the interesting things about the therapeutic practices, those 15% that I mentioned, is that most of them are practices that we all already know. And one of my favorite forms of therapy, there's two of them actually, acceptance and commitment therapy, basically just means getting comfortable with paradox, accepting that things are not the way you always want them to be, and committing yourself to being a better person. The other is DBT, dialectical behavioral training. And there are several different practices within DBT that just help us shift our mindset in situations where we may be triggered. I've also been really honest and open about my struggles with borderline personality disorder. It's on the books. It is one of the most challenging mental health struggles that a human can deal with. It's basically like the combination of bipolar, schizophrenia, and oh gosh, there's another one. I'm blanking on it. Anyway, it's been a real challenge. I've had a really, really tough time with my mental health over the years. And it was only when I started to be upfront about it and engage in community that I started to see real and lasting change. And I am. I mean, it's been probably 7 years at this point that I have been actively engaging in rewiring, intentionally integrating the lessons that I've learned from these experiences, specifically around my suicidality or my addictive tendencies, that within community has drastically improved the quality of my mental health to the point where I feel like I am probably 90 to 95% asymptomatic, which is saying a lot. Because it was really a struggle for a long time. So again, I want to be really honest and transparent with my own relationship with these processes. There were so many years that I just took mushrooms, and sure, I'd have all kinds of conversations about what I saw, what I felt, the changes that I knew I needed to make. But it wasn't until I had a community where I actually was held accountable by my own word to becoming the person, not running from the community. It's a crucial, essential part. People do the same thing in therapy. You know, I won't get into that. It's maybe too personal of a family story, but I had a family member who just completely ran from therapy when it got too hard. People do that. This is why real integration takes real courage. It takes real commitment. It takes acceptance. It takes community. It takes loving yourself. You cannot will yourself to be a better person. You have to love yourself into being a better person. Community is going to help you uncover the layers to find out who you really are. And honestly, folks, that is why we're in this life together. We have a tendency to think that we're here to achieve, to leave our mark, to make our money, to have the family, to write the book, or build whatever it might be. I'm starting to believe very strongly that the real purpose of life is to uncover who we truly are. And all these things that we do are an effort to build an identity, when the most effective thing we can do is uncover our identity. That's so much of what the psychedelic work is about. You don't go into a psychedelic experience and have new layers of personality put on you. You have old layers stripped off so that you can become a new person by being the person you originally always were. I love the paradox. Paradox is what this work is all about. So, if you're so inclined to experience a psychedelic community that is faith-based, and let me just touch on this real quick. All right, I didn't get on the faith-based spiritual part of this. Religion itself has done a real number on us. Religion is what has turned people away from spirituality. One of my favorite quotes about how religion has impacted our spirituality comes from Haile Selassie. This is an Ethiopian emperor. He was an amazing human being and a great teacher and spiritual leader, as a matter of fact, as well. He says in this quote, "We must stop confusing religion and spirituality. Religion is a set of rules, regulations, and rituals created by humans which were supposed to help people grow spiritually. Due to human imperfection, religion has become corrupt, political, divisive, and a tool for power struggle. Spirituality is not theology or ideology. It is simply a way of life, pure and original as was given by the Most High. Spirituality is a network linking us to the Most High, to the universe, and each other." Now, this is why conversation around spiritual community is essential to psychedelic integration. And it doesn't matter to me what your personal thoughts are on religion or spirituality. I mean, I'm interested. If we were having a conversation, I'd love to hear your perspective. But no one's perspective individually changes the fact that, first of all, we are spiritual beings. Now, again, the definition of spiritual can become a little convoluted. I like to think of it in terms of energetic beings. We are beings of consciousness. Consciousness, as we are starting to uncover, does not reside in the body. Consciousness is the source of all. And it's a beautiful, beautiful thought experiment to play with. This is why psychics and people can pull information out of the ether, is because consciousness is primary. Consciousness, pure consciousness, is how I understand God, source, spirituality. Okay? Energetics is another way. If you've ever done, this is an exercise that I love to share in the workshops that I lead, where you create the chi ball. Have you ever done this, folks, where you can feel the magnetic push between your hands? You can literally feel the magnetic north and south push between your hands. It's actually, I guess it would be north and north, or the same poles when you feel that push. Wow, I'm already starting to feel it build up there. And that is illustrative to me of a metaphysical nature. Let's call it that. A part of ourselves that is beyond the physical. Okay? Psychedelics invariably touch on this. And it doesn't mean you have to have an experience where you talk to Jesus or Buddha. A psychedelic experience that you cannot put into words is touching this ineffable, metaphysical, immaterial awareness. Very few therapists or therapeutic practices are going to be able to even speak to that or connect with it. You will have experiences with psychedelics that will rattle your cage. You will not know what to do with it if you do this work for any period of time at any level of depth. And there is enormous value there. But in order to truly make it valuable, you've got to be able to have a community where you can talk about it, where you can talk about the things that you don't know how to talk about. There is no coincidence that the decline of religious communities in the United States correlates with the increase of therapy. We went from communities of faith where if you had the ability and capacity to donate to that organization, you could do so. And you would have all kinds of services and opportunities accessible to you, community and reflection and feedback. And now we've outsourced all of that for $200 to $300 an hour to a therapist that you don't actually, like, don't get me wrong, like my therapist who I mentioned, or the therapist that my wife and I are working with, she's an incredible human being. I really enjoy the relationship that we have. But I also know that in 2 weeks, when this year-long program is over, we won't be in relationship anymore. But the people that I'm in relationship with now through our sanctuary community, that will last. Many of those folks have been around for 4 or 5 years. And the payoff it's immeasurable in comparison to a standard therapist. We are spiritual beings. We can all have different language for that. Religion has done a real number on our relationship with spirit because it has become corrupted. There's just no two ways about that. I am a product of the Catholic Church. I have many Catholic friends, and I am still very critical of that organization that has basically institutionalized child abuse. I will not make no bones about it. It's horrifying, and it is still alive and active. So, why should anybody seek out a religious organization if they have become corrupt? My personal belief is that we've got to rebuild them. My personal belief is that some of them are beyond hope. Those that are so top down, where there is, like the Pope, an international figurehead who you have no connection with, no ability to be in actual relationship with, that is detrimental to the religious community. There are absolutely churches, religious communities, spiritual communities where people come together. And while there are leaders, those leaders are held accountable to the community. That is exactly what we're trying to, and not we're trying to, it's what we are building and what we have built. I'm not trying to sell you on sanctuary by any means. I want people to really take back this word church. It was a struggle for me. When I first started sanctuary, I couldn't even say the word God. I couldn't. It was years, that's only 5 years ago. It took me about a year of having this religious organization, this spiritual organization, before I could get comfortable with the words church and God. And now that I have, there's really no better container for the psychedelic work. That's why my book is called The Psychedelic Reformation. Psilocybin belongs in a church, not a clinic. There are so many examples of that, and we'll talk about more of those as time goes on. I feel like right now I've given you all plenty to think about. I really deeply appreciate if you've stuck with me this far. If you have, then you might as well like this video, friends. Come on. Help me get some movement on this algorithm. Help people get more exposed to these ideas. We can take back our power and authority over our own lives. We can continue to go to therapists. We can continue to go to religious communities. And we, in our individual lives, can take authority and ownership of the outcomes of our psychedelic experience. 40% of your positive outcomes have to do with things outside of the therapy office, outside of the psychedelic ceremony. Take responsibility. Love yourself enough to show up in community. Love yourself enough to spend some time with a qualified, good therapist. Love yourself to integrate your psychedelic experiences in real, meaningful ways by becoming the person you're meant to be. Thanks so much. I hope to see you again. Till next time.